Andrea looked out the car window, imagining herself swimming in the sea and resting in a hammock to the sound of palm leaves. It had been years since she last took a vacation, and all she wanted was to rest. She was with her boyfriend, Jonathan, who was driving the car. They had been on the road for several hours to reach their destination. Andrea was tired despite just sitting, her legs ached, and to make matters worse, she was hungry. "Love, can we stop at the next gas station? I want to use the bathroom, eat something, and stretch my legs. They are hurting," Andrea said. Jonathan replied that they were close to the next station and would stop there. Upon arrival, Andrea stretched her legs, used the bathroom, and bought some things at the convenience store. There was a restaurant right in front of the station, but what caught her attention was a boy who seemed to be selling something. On closer inspection, she realized he was selling small chocolates to those leaving the restaurant. Suddenly, a security guard seemed to escort the boy away. He must be expelling the boy away from the customers, thought Andrea. The boy looked at the restaurant from a distance and gave up. He walked towards the gas station and saw Andrea standing by the car, waiting for Jonathan. "Mom, would you like me to wash your car? I'll do it for a very cheap price," said the boy. Something about his manner touched her heart, and Andrea wanted to help the poor boy. "Okay, you can wash it. I'm going to have lunch at the restaurant and we'll be back in 30 minutes. What's your name?" asked Andrea. "My name is Samuel. I'll clean it in less time, thank you," said the boy. While Samuel cleaned the car, Andrea explained what she had done to Jonathan, who agreed, and they went to the restaurant for lunch while he cleaned the car. 30 minutes later, the couple returned, and the car was completely clean. Andrea and Jonathan bought a lunch and gave it to Samuel, who was very grateful. Andrea took some notes out of her pocket and handed them to him, but first asked what he would do with the money. The boy lowered his head and said, "I'm going to hide it from my mother. Sometimes she takes my money and spends it at night. If I hide it, I can buy food for myself later," Samuel said. Andrea realized from that simple sentence that his life must not be easy and that whoever was supposed to take care of the boy was not doing so. She gave him the money but asked him to wait a bit, as she would give him something more. She went to the car and after searching for a while, came out with a bracelet in her hand. It was a silver bracelet. "Are you sure you want to give this to him? Your grandmother gave it to you," said her boyfriend, worried about what she would do. Andrea was resolute and gave the bracelet to the boy. Samuel couldn't stop smiling, saying he would never take it off. That bracelet was a gift from her grandmother, the only relative she had. For years, Andrea took care of her grandmother when her health was fragile. But after she got better, her grandmother told her to go out and have more fun, as she was now well. Thus, Andrea planned this trip with her boyfriend. Andrea and Jonathan got into the car, and Samuel waved goodbye until the car disappeared from sight. The two had smiles on their faces, feeling they had done good for the boy. The young couple spent several days on a paradisiacal beach. Andrea could finally rest and enjoy life a little. "You deserve it, my love. You've taken care of your grandmother since a very early age, and during that time, you couldn't go out or have fun. Now enjoy it," said her boyfriend. It was true. Andrea lost her parents at a young age, and her maternal grandmother took care of her, but she had cancer and underwent years of treatment. Andrea never left her grandmother's side and never missed a chemotherapy session. Her grandmother felt she was stealing her granddaughter's youth, but for Andrea, staying by her grandmother's side was no sacrifice. Despite having 3 living uncles, they never visited or called their mother, so all the caretaking fell on the granddaughter. Andrea's love and care helped in the healing of her grandmother, who finally was well and could return to a normal life. During her stroll around the city, Andrea saw a toy and clothing store. She looked at Jonathan and he immediately knew what she wanted. Andrea entered the store and bought some toys and various clothes for Samuel. When she returned, she would give them all to him and was eager to see the boy's smile. When the trip ended, the couple made sure to pass by the same gas station. There, they looked for Samuel, but he wasn't there. Talking to the employees, they said that Samuel usually comes every day to sell chocolates, but it had been days since he had appeared, which was very strange. With no other choice, they left the toys and clothes with the gas station employees, who said they would give them to Samuel as soon as he appeared. Andrea returned home sad for not being able to see the boy Samuel and give everything to him in person. 13 years later. Andrea beside her grandmother's coffin. She cried with sadness and longing for the woman who raised her like a mother. None of her grandmother's children attended the funeral. There were a few people there, but only 2 deeply mourned her loss, a gentleman Andrea didn't know, and David, a young man who was very grateful to Andrea's grandmother. Lillian, Andrea's grandmother, worked for many years in social assistance entities, and throughout those years, she became very attached to David. He was a needy child living in a community. His parents didn't take care of him, and he often roamed the streets. Mrs. Lillian helped the boy with food, clothes, and even scolded him when he did something wrong. Although no one believed David would amount to much in life, Lillian had faith in the young man. Thanks to all the help she gave him, David grew up to be a hard-working and successful man. When he learned of Lillian's death, David offered to help Andrea with the funeral and anything else she needed. Andrea gratefully accepted the help. As she was alone, she had ended her relationship with Jonathan, and the two were now just friends. But she didn't have the courage to ask for help from her ex, as he was already married and had a daughter. David and Andrea stayed at the site for a few hours, looking at Lillian's grave. They left together, but Andrea kept looking at the distant gentleman she didn't know. He wouldn't leave Lillian's grave for anything. Could my grandmother have been important to him? She thought. David gave Andrea a ride home and left her there. In her bed, she cried for hours, missing her grandmother, who was also her best friend and great advisor in life. Besides all the sadness, there was the anger she felt towards her uncles. Lillian had 3 sons, but none of them were close to their mother. The first son was greedy, loved money, and although he earned well, he never gave a penny to help his mother when she was sick. The second son didn't have money, and to make matters worse, spent everything on gambling. The few times he called his mother were to borrow money, which he never paid back. But Lillian, fearing her son was in great need, gave what she could. The third son liked to live life so much that one day he said he would travel and live in several different states and never returned. Andrea knew little about this uncle. The last information she had was that he lived in a car because he never thought much about the future and only wanted to live in the present. Andrea tried to move on despite the pain of losing a loved one. She was a university professor and began working day and night to alleviate the pain of the loss. A month had passed since her grandmother's burial. Andrea was at home when there was a knock on her door. She was startled when she opened it and saw her 3 uncles looking at her. "Uncles, what are you doing here?" Andrea asked, shocked, as they hadn't attended their own mother's funeral, so why had they returned now? Even without her permission, the 3 uncles entered and started looking around the apartment, examining each room with their gaze. This made Andrea uncomfortable, as it was her home. "Andrea, my niece, you must leave this apartment within 2 days at most. We are putting it up for sale, and soon people will start coming here to see it," one of her uncles said. Andrea was so shocked that she didn't know what to do or say. After regaining her composure, she said, "I live here. This apartment belonged to my grandmother. I took care of her all my life. and you didn't even come to her funeral or wake. What right do you think you have over her house? Don't you honor your mother's memory?" Andrea said all this very nervously and angrily. "It doesn't matter. We are her sons, and you have no right to the apartment, nor to any furniture or any jewelry or money our mother may have left us." She was nervous and sad. It all seemed like an affront to her grandmother, whom she loved so much. While the three uncles were searching the apartment, Andrea overheard them talking among themselves. She learned from their conversation that they planned to split the money from the sale. All three had the same goal with the money: to pay off debts. One wanted to pay off gambling debts, another to repay money borrowed from dangerous people, and the last was tired of living in a car and urgently wanted to improve his life. Andrea had her own job and could pay for a place to live, but they wanted her out in just 2 days. It was too little time to find a place. Besides, she would have to buy furniture. But this was not the worst for her. Her entire childhood was in that apartment beside her grandmother. All her memories were there. She didn't want to let go of that. Andrea was furious. She would fight for that place. She confronted her uncles and said she would not leave for anything. The three looked at her and started laughing, trying to intimidate her. "Because of your audacity, I'll give you until tomorrow to leave, or else we'll call the police. Remember, we are her sons, and you are just a niece. You have no right to anything. You better leave, or you will be embarrassed by the police, forcibly evicting you." Her uncles left, and then Andrea began to cry. As much as she felt angry, they were right. She had no right to anything there. She never imagined her uncles could be so greedy. After drying her tears, Andrea called David, who was outraged by what her uncles did. He said he would try to find a way to help her and asked her not to worry, as she could stay as long as she needed at his house. Andrea thanked him and then tried to sleep. The next day, she woke up to knocks at the door. Could it be them again, she thought. She got up and went to the door, and to her surprise, they weren't lying. Her uncles had called the police. There was just a young police officer who said that Andrea was summoned to leave the apartment as soon as possible, as she was occupying someone else's property. Andrea began to cry, and the officer for a moment felt sorry for the woman, but had to stay firm and do his job. He was very polite and said he would give her a few more hours to prepare her things and leave, that he would not use force. Andrea thanked him for his understanding and began to pack her suitcase. Her heart was broken to leave that place with so many good memories. The officer was at the entrance of the apartment. She offered him water, and he accepted. When the officer, wearing a uniform with long sleeves, raised the cup to drink water, the bracelet on his arm became visible. It can't be, thought Andrea. She went to a box of photos and took one out in particular. It was a picture of her very young, wearing the same bracelet her grandmother had just given her. Andrea showed the photo to the officer and pointed to the bracelet. "Samuel, is that you?" asked Andrea. The young officer immediately smiled, and his eyes shone almost to the point of crying. "My God, I never forgot you. I said I would always wear this bracelet," said Samuel. She asked him to come in and sit down to talk with her. Samuel had become a strong and handsome man who was already independent and responsible. Andrea asked what had happened to him back then and if he had received everything she had sent. Samuel began to tell his story. "Back then, I lived with my mother, but she did many wrong things, and there was never any food at home. That's why I sold chocolates at the gas station and in front of the restaurant. Sometimes I slept at home, sometimes not. It depended a lot on how my mother was. After you gave me this bracelet, I tried to hide it because she wanted to sell it when she saw it. Since I didn't let her, I spent a few days not going home. But I got hungry, so I had to go back. But when I arrived, she was no longer there. My mother was arrested, and the child welfare services were looking for me. I went to the gas station, and they gave me everything you left for me. I was very happy. At that time, it was rare for me to receive affection or gifts, especially from strangers. In a way, you helped me have more faith in people. However, I was taken to an orphanage, but I ran away from there because I didn't feel good. I spent days sleeping on the street near the gas station. The owner of the station was a very kind lady. When she realized I was sleeping on the street nearby, she gave me a place to stay in a storage room at the station. But it didn't last long. She began to treat me better and said she would try to adopt me. She already had 2 children who were married and lived alone. She started the adoption process, and finally I had a home to live in. She is still alive and taking care of the gas station. I studied a lot and always dreamed of being a police officer. Fortunately, last year, I managed to fulfill my dream. As he spoke, Andrea looked at the bracelet and smiled happily for the young man. Samuel asked what had happened for her to be evicted. After explaining everything, Samuel was outraged and said he would help her as much as he could. He made some calls and said they would return soon with more information. Meanwhile, the two talked and caught up. A few minutes later, Samuel received a call and said there was a discrepancy in the information her uncles were giving, but he was still investigating. Samuel said it might take time for him to have more information. Unfortunately, she would have to leave. But he would do his best to help her get her apartment back. Andrea was sad, but having Samuel by her side comforted her. He asked if she had a place to stay, and Andrea said yes. She took Samuel's contact and called David. Andrea spent the night at David's house, who received her very well. The two were the same age and had known each other for a long time. He did everything to make her feel comfortable and well. But what Andrea really wanted was her grandmother's house with all its memories. The next morning, Samuel called and said he had new information about the discrepancy. Andrea listened to everything he said but couldn't believe it. Andrea, David, and Samuel went to the apartment and there found her 3 uncles already packing the furniture to sell the apartment. Samuel said they couldn't do that because the apartment wasn't theirs. The 3 smiled and asked if by chance it belonged to Andrea. Samuel also replied that no, the apartment wasn't any of theirs, because the apartment wasn't Lillian's, Andrea's grandmother. They smiled again, thinking it was all a farce, but Samuel, as a police officer, made them maintain respect. He called the real owner of the place, and in a few minutes, he arrived. Andrea's uncles, and even she, were shocked to see who it was. The owner of the apartment was the gentleman who wouldn't stop crying at Lillian's funeral. He was the last to leave there. The old gentleman looked at everyone and then explained, "I have known Lillian for many years. Every time her granddaughter went to work or to college, the 2 of us would go to the square to talk. She helped me dozens of times, and I helped her too. Once she told me she was worried about her granddaughter because she had the apartment, as well as money and jewelry in the bank. None of this could be hers, since she had 3 living sons who, according to her, didn't care about her well-being. The law would give everything to the children. So, she had the idea to transfer all her assets to my name. At the time, I thought it was crazy, but I was flattered, as it required unimaginable trust. I don't have children, and since she had cancer, she always thought she would die before me. But she survived cancer and only passed away years later. I am old and had forgotten that I was the owner of this apartment. I will honor the wishes of my great friend and transfer all the assets to her granddaughter, as that was her wish." Everyone was silent, and Andrea cried, remembering her grandmother. Her uncles didn't like what they heard and tried to cause trouble, but Samuel was there to maintain order, and they all left with their heads down. Time passed. The gentleman transferred all the assets to Andrea, which included the apartment, money in the bank, and even jewelry. But she was happiest about the apartment she loved so much because of the memories. Andrea and David became very close after everything that happened. The two started a relationship that turned into an engagement. At the wedding, Samuel looked at his bracelet, happy that the woman who helped him restore his faith in humanity could have a happy ending. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thank you for watching.